Hey everybody, what's going on? Rob Cesternino back here for another one of our Survivor 44 post-game interviews. And I'm so delighted to be here with the comp beast. Of course, the woman who didn't win, but found love on Survivor. It's Frannie Marin. Frannie, how are you?
Oh, I'm excellent. I love to hear the ding. How are you, Rob?
Oh, I'm so excited. I really was looking forward to this conversation. I had a really fun when we did the exit interview back a couple of months ago. And so very nice to
Mhm.
get the chance to catch up now. Franny, what's been going on?
Oh, not much. Just getting back to the swing of things at work. Obviously now have a lot more friends all around the country and in Canada, so traveling a lot to visit those people. And trying to think about if I want to move soon, maybe to go spend some more time with Matt. So lots to think about.
So you and Matt are still together, okay, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah, yeah.
but you are in different cities?
We are like as far as we could possibly be. I'm in Boston and he's in San Francisco. So it's we take a lot of 6-hour flights. I've mastered the 6-hour flight, but we're looking to reduce that a little bit.
Okay. All right. So we're all very excited to get the updates on that. But, we can talk about that anytime. Today, we're talking
Mhm.
about your time in Survivor 44 and your experience. And so, looking forward to digging into all of that. Franny, um, how has been the reception been to you since the show has been over?
Oh gosh, I mean it's been very positive. It was overwhelming for a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of people say this, but anybody who DM'd me on any platform, I'm so sorry. Like I saw it probably and I'm sure I loved it, but I'm not going to get back to you. But yeah, it was great. I had so many people reach out to me and a lot of people who felt like they saw themselves in me in some way or, saw themselves in this idea of like maybe not having high expectations for yourself and how you're going to perform and then exceeding those and being really proud. So it was really great to like hear all those stories and speak to some of those people. And I've gotten to talk to some of them on like Cameo and stuff. That's the most exciting. Yeah, it's been really, really good.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to hear that. And I know that the audience responded so well to you on the show. And so, so happy to hear for somebody who's a big fan like you that it was such a positive experience overall.
Yeah. Well, and truly, like, I mean, genuinely, it was like the most, I can't imagine it being better. And we'll like get to some of these, even some of the moments that were like really hard or really frustrating. I'm still very grateful for every single one of them. So yeah, I feel like I really got out scot free. I had the best time. I have a nice, cute boyfriend and we're living life.
Okay. Well, Franny, let's just go back to the beginning and, your being ready to be sent into the game in Survivor 44. I mean, how are you feeling going into the game?
Yeah, I was feeling very, very anxious. I think a lot of people when they're about to start the game have this experience. Well, okay, I think there's kind of like two ends of the spectrum. Either you're about to start the game and you're like, how am I here? How did I get picked for this? Like I shouldn't. I felt like I was an imposter syndrome. Like who let me in here? And I think some people are like, I'm about to win. You know what I mean? And that's where Jam Jam was, and maybe that's why he won. But I was very nervous. I was like, I feel like everyone else here is like way more stacked than me. I journaled in my, little, which I have here. I journaled all day at Ponderosa about how I was like, I'm the weakest link here. Like, I'm all stressed out about that. So it was a very like anxious beginning, I would say. I was so convinced that I was going to get voted out first that I planned my like first vote out, talk to the camera speech. I was going to make a reference to like Francesca, Hoagie. It was going to be a whole thing. But so I'm not mad that I didn't have to use that.
So, did you do something to combat that anxiety, or you just went through it?
Yeah, I kind of just went through it. So I work in like mindfulness research. So I have a lot of
Yeah.
experience with that. And Ponderosa pregame, oh my gosh, it's like all a mindfulness like opportunity. You're just sitting there, like so I tried to just sort of sit with what I was going through as much as I could and think about what I did bring to the table and be confident in that. But yeah, I mean, I was very nervous beforehand, very
It's so
nervous.
interesting that you were saying to yourself, "You're the weakest, you're the weak link," and
Yeah.
then you turned out to have like the complete opposite story.
Yeah, completely shocking. And we'll get to this, but some of the things that I thought I would be really very good at, like some of the strategic things, woo, there were times where I was like, what are we doing? And I got confused, or you know what I mean? So I think that overall, the whole experience, like, totally flip flopped what I thought my strengths were and what I was bringing to the table, which, was a positive experience, but was also surprising and confusing.
Okay, so you're going to end up on the Soka tribe,
Mhm.
and you're with this group where it's you and Claire and Heidi and
Mhm.
Josh and Danny, and of course Matt. How did you feel about, because going back to that first episode, you were talking about how like we're a family.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, the very first, marooning day when Jeff, oh my gosh, I remember. So the very first day, they show Jeff asks me some sort of question about like what bonds you to these people, and I started talking about bad breath. I remember in the moment being like so frenzied. Like, what do I say in response to these questions? I remember thinking, did everyone else get questions ahead of time? Because people had these like beautifully crafted answers, and you're hearing people's voices for the first time. And I was like, oh my God, these people know what they're doing. And then I go and I talk about bad breath. And I remember thinking immediately after, like, oh, thank goodness. They're not going to air that. Like, I don't have to worry about that being on TV. And then when they released it in the, preview or whatever, I was like, dang it. So I was, yeah, that was
Did
a very tense
somebody
moment.
actually have bad breath yet?
No, it was me. Well, oh, and that's the part that they didn't show is, so I make this comment about bad breath, and then Jeff comes back at me with who has the worst breath. And then I said, it's probably me. And that got a couple laughs. So that diffused the tension slightly.
Hmm.
But nobody had bad breath.
Yeah. Okay. So when you got to the beach with Soka, and you're there with Matt, is it
Mhm.
like is it love at first sight? Is it like Cupid's arrow, or are there like a couple of days where you get to know each other?
Yeah. So this is, and people in my life know this about me. This is so unlike me. Like getting into a relationship on the show, it's just like I don't watch The Bachelorette. Like I don't do any of this stuff. So it's so unlike me. But I feel like in a lot of ways, it really was like love, if not connection at first sight. Matt and I were literally like making eyes at each other and forming some sort of like special connection even before the game started at
Okay.
Ponderosa pregame. Like we sat next to each other. We would make eyes at each other all the time. We have the same journal, and I would like see him writing, and I was like, this is a cosmic interference that this guy and I have the same journal. So as soon as we realized we were both on the Green Tribe together, it was just, I knew that we were going to connect. And the first day when we're sitting there weaving palm fronds, we see in the premiere, that's literally our first conversation. And Matt said to me, like, I'm feeling kind of anxious. I feel like the other people here are like really suave and really good socially. And my response was like, I'm anxious too. Like, let's go through this together. So it was very immediate. And I immediately felt like an all encompassing like comfort with him. And I never had any doubt in my mind that he would just like tell me the truth and go with what we felt was best, which
And
was
so
cool.
you have that comfort with him, but at the same time, you, I'm sure, as such a student of the game, knew that other people are going to probably have some issues with this. So, how did you hold those two things at once? Of okay, a comfort, but also people are not going to like this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it was really, really hard because um I think at first it our special bond didn't feel like such an issue because a lot of the things that we would laugh about or connect about were when we were all together in a big group. So in my mind, I'm like, everyone has an opportunity to like laugh at these things. It's not like we're in a corner giggling together. Um, but I think for me, I actually, for a while, felt strategically closer to Claire. So I think I was a little blinded by that, where I was like, in my hierarchy of alliance members, I don't know that Matt is number one at this point. And I sort of had hoped that other people would pick up on that. I think not realizing just how much people were noticing the time that we spent together. And you see me say to him, we should stop spending so much time together. I think it's something that I started to get anxious about. But I mean, you've been there, like when you're so tired and so hungry, you just gravitate towards the people that actually make you laugh and make you happy. And he is like that person for me. So it was really hard.
So, Franny, were you at all like thinking about how this was going to be presented on the show? Because I feel like that Matt is probably like a lot more open about this in his confessionals. And with
Yeah.
you, I feel like that you're more guarded, and they even had to, go to the moment where the producer ends up asking you, are you blushing? Because it seemed like maybe you didn't want to talk so much about it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, completely accurate. They really kind of pulled it out of me, and so I think in the game, I was so against this idea of having a romantic connection with somebody that I actually had a lot of internal walls up about it and was kind of not letting myself feel those emotions. I was very much just like, Matt and I are very close friends, and I kind of would say things to that effect in the interviews. But if I stopped and thought about it a little more, I was like, okay, maybe it's more than that. But even going through the whole season, and this is the thing, all the people in my life make fun of me for this. When I got home, I told people, I was like, so I have a boyfriend now. This is so awkward. But then I told them, I was like, I don't think that it's going to come up on the show at all. I was like, we were so
Oh,
subtle that there's no way they could even pull together footage about this
and
relationship.
that's where you're wrong.
And
Yeah.
that's where I'm wrong. And so I think from my perspective, like, I didn't know that he was going into confessionals and saying that I had a cute snort or whatever. So from my perspective, it felt like a kind of subtle romance that really started to blossom when we had
He
time
was
together at
playing it
Ponderosa.
cool.
Yeah, he was playing it so cool. He goes straight into confessional and he's like, she's cute. But so I was not expecting that at all. And I remember even the first episode, you can see that they're starting that storyline. And with me knowing what happens, knowing the way that Matt goes home, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be like a narrative. And that was really shocking for me.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about the early days of Soka from your perspective?
Yeah. The early days of Soka were really fun. So I think Danny kind of set a precedent of hard work. Like, we didn't sit around and rest much. We were constantly expanding the shelter. We were constantly gathering firewood. So that was kind of like the energy of Soka, but we also had a lot of fun together. And I felt sort of the like social and strategic dynamics in that early game. It became clear to me pretty quickly that Danny and Heidi were kind of together. They spent a lot of time together talking. Josh and Matt actually were aligned strategically, which is not something we really got to see. We unfortunately didn't see much of Josh's game early. And then I felt closest strategically with Claire. And then with this added confusion of like, I'm really tight with Matt on a personal level. So I think when it came time to actually, vote when we go to tribal, it was very confusing because it was hard to tell sort of where things were lying. And because we, take so long to go to tribal, there were a lot of things sort of like brewing. And so I actually remember feeling nervous when we were first going to tribal because, you always like are afraid that it's going to be you, but feeling a little glad about it because we just had so much brewing under the surface that I really wanted to like get some votes out there and actually see where people's loyalties were, and then move forward from there. So yeah.
How much did Matt not having a vote for not one but two tribal councils impact you?
That was so frustrating. Yeah. I mean, so for example, if Matt has a vote at the first tribal council, I don't think Claire goes home. I think that we would have certainly worked something out for her to stay. I remember, so Matt tells everyone, right, that he lost one vote. And he told me very shortly after that he lost his second vote. And that was just so frustrating and devastating because I was like, dang it. I know that this guy's going to like go with me. I know that he's going to be a loyal alliance member, but like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I haven't, like, we can't work as a unit if we only have one vote between the two of us. So it was frustrating. And then it was also hard from the perspective of secret keeping because people saw Matt and I talk alone. They figured, I don't know how people like figured this out so quickly. I really trusted him at face value, but people assumed that he would have reached his hand into the bag a second time and either lost a second vote or gotten an advantage. And so after Matt told me that he lost a second vote, he said, don't tell anyone. I had people like Heidi and Claire coming up to me and being like, so did Matt tell you anything? Like, does he have an advantage? And I had to be like, oh no, I don't think so. So that was just kind of a difficult line to straddle, but again, made me feel good that I knew I was the only person who he told. So from that perspective, it built trust, but it made it really hard to finagle numbers moving forward.
Okay. It seems like that. Okay. After Claire goes home, that Josh is going to be the consensus target over at Soka, and you had said that And I forget exactly, did you say that he was shady? That you felt like that he was not somebody that you felt like that you could work with. Was there anything that you had caught on to from Josh from Soka that made you feel that way?
Totally. Yeah. And I wish again that they had showed this more, even, for him, like because he was playing the game and he was doing a lot. So it doesn't really make sense when all of us are like, we don't Heidi and I are saying we don't trust Josh. I think people are kind of like, why? So I think Heidi said this in her interview as well, but it was sort of clear to us that Josh had some sort of wall up because he's like, lying about his profession and stuff. We never really sussed out on our end that he was actually podiatrist, but it sort of felt hard to connect with him from that perspective. And then out of anyone, Josh spent the most time kind of off on his own. Felt really clear to me that he was like looking for idols and advantages. And somebody like Danny also spent a lot of time on his own. But Danny came back with like 20 pieces of firewood. And then Josh would kind of come back with one and like throw it on the pile. And so for that reason, it sort of really felt to me like he was doing a lot. To try to like get ahead in the game just for him. And he and I didn't really, which like, how dare he try to get ahead in the game? Not that that's a bad thing, but it sort of felt shady. And then with Josh, I tried to kind of establish a strategic relationship with just him and I. He and I had a couple conversations with myself, Josh, and Matt, where it was sort of like, okay, maybe the three of us are kind of on the same page, maybe with Claire as well. But the first time that I tried to have a conversation with just Josh, I, said a couple things to him. We were like, okay, it sort of felt like we were on the same page and connecting. Literally within an hour, I had Claire coming up to me and telling me everything that I had just told Josh. And at that point, I was like, oh, wow, the information flow here is very fast. And so I feel like if I ever, God forbid, if I ever wanted to like say anything against Claire, say anything against Heidi, I felt like Josh would go and spit it back to them verbatim within an hour. And so after that happened, I was kind of like, I don't think I can actually trust this person with information. Because for me, like, I feel like in our season, especially, people had loose lips. Like everyone was telling secrets all the time. You could not keep information tight. And I felt like I was one of the few people who I would get a piece of information and actually really wanted to like guard it and not tell anyone until the perfect time, which I'm sure we'll get to this soon. But that's kind of what happened with some of the information about Matt's idol as well.
Yeah.
And so it was just like confusing to me that people would spill information so quickly. And I wanted to like avoid that at all costs.
Well, tell me about how you figure into Matt's idol, because I feel like we obviously see what Danny does and see Matt's finding it, but I feel like that the show doesn't give us too much of where you come into all of this.
Yeah, totally. So what's really interesting about the idol is, so at the very first group immunity challenge, we see Claire talking to Matthew on the sit-out bench. That challenge was a lot longer than they made it look, right? So they had a lot of time to talk together. They talked about the, like journey thing, which is how Matthew started to blow things up at RHAP about Lauren's extra vote. But what they also talked about that we don't see is Matthew told Claire that RHAP had opened up their birdcage altogether, and he told her what was inside, which was a real and a fake idol, and a note that basically said like, this one's fake and this one's real, like do with this what you will. So Claire comes back to camp. We all talk about what went down. She shares a lot of information, but she only tells me what she heard from Matthew about the birdcage idol, that there's a real one and a fake one. So for a couple of days there, Claire and I are just moving through the world, trying to find this birdcage key, knowing exactly what's going to be inside. Eventually, Matt finds this key. I had no idea that Danny had found it, right? So Matt finds this key that Danny has planted. He comes up to me and he's like, guess what? I found the key. I'm going to go open the birdcage. It's probably an idol. Like, this is amazing. And at that point, I was like, well, crap. I hate to break it to you, but like, this is what you're going to find inside. And I told him, I was like, you should find a real idol and a fake idol. And I was like, I'm not going to go with you. Like, you go open it yourself. I understand that's a solo thing. You know what I mean? It's like private moment. But if you only see one thing in there, then it's probably fake. And he comes back and he's like, there's just one idol in there. And for me, I immediately knew like that shit's fake. Like, I was like, I don't trust that for 1 second. I think for Matt, there was a little too much like of a game of telephone happening where he was like, Matthew might have lied, Claire might have lied, Frannie might have lied. So he still sort of had some level of belief that the idol was real.
Wanted to believe.
He wanted to believe, right? And like, I get that. And again, it's like back to this thing with like, you have this note that like looks like a perfectly, you know, production made idol note. So why would you go against that? But for me, I was like, I don't believe for 1 second that this thing is real. Like, absolutely not. But then, okay, so then it became a game of trying to figure out who had the real thing.
Yeah.
Claire, I figured she would have told me. So like she's ruled out immediately, or she would have played it when she went home. I didn't really feel like Heidi had it because she hadn't been going off on her own a lot. So for me, it was between Danny and Josh. And there was a point where Josh, who had been going off on his own a lot, started to spend a lot of time lying around in the shelter. And I found out later that this is because he was not feeling good. Like he had stomach pains and he was having a rough time. But at the time I was like, this is so suspicious. Josh has found the idol. Now he no longer feels the need to go look for it. So I was moving forward with this assumption that Josh had the idol. And then, okay, this is skipping ahead a little bit, but at the merge feast, right? We have like myself, Brandon, Jamie, Carson, Carolyn, Matt. And Carolyn is trying to explain to us why she believes that Josh's idol is fake. He's going around telling people he has an idol. She's like, I've seen it. It fell apart in his hand. It's fake. I think a lot of people watching were like, why doesn't anybody believe Carolyn? You know what I mean? Nobody listens to her, blah, blah. For me, I took everything that she said, and from my perspective, not having seen this janky idol, which now that I see it on TV, I'm like, that was totally janky. I feel like the story that she told actually corroborated this idea that Josh had the idol, because if he had taken the birdcage idol, right, you know, taken the birdcage idol, planted the key, put the fake one back in there with the paper that says it's real, he would not have a paper to show. And so when Carolyn was like, he showed the same idol paper that he got on the journey, that made sense to me, because I was like, he shouldn't have a piece of paper from that birdcage idol because Matt has it. So just to like explain why people didn't really believe her, I was like very convinced that he had something up his sleeve. Obviously it turned out he didn't. And as soon as Josh went home at that vote, I was like, okay, it has to be Danny. And then, you know, which by the way, love that came full circle to be played on me. That was so delightful. I was like, this whole idol thing was so confusing, but I was happy it got used on me.
Yeah, it was a happy outcome for you. So to go to Josh then, when you get to the first vote for at Mergatory, is that the reason why Josh ends up going home? Because that was always confusing in terms of what Soka was doing in terms of like voting out one of your own at that first vote.
Yeah. So this is something we actually talked about as like that Soka 4 of myself, Matt, Danny, Heidi, not including Jamie at that point, before we went to the earn the merge, because we had kind of determined that when we got to merge, and this was immediately clear, people saw allegiances in terms of your original tribal lines. So people saw Josh as a Soka, not as a Tikka. And I had gotten the vibe, even just from going to like early game challenges, that the other tribes were kind of like annoyed with Soka because we had been winning so much. And there sort of felt like there was a narrative building of like, we got to beat Soka. Like they're the strong tribe, whatever. And so once we got to merge, I thought it would actually behoove us to get out one of our own in Josh, who's somebody who none of the 4 of us really trusted. But it appears as though our group is being weakened. I kind of thought that would help moving forward so that it doesn't feel like we're this like Soka monolith that's going to vote everybody out. Like I felt that it was an opportunity to show that we are willing to work in a cross-tribal way without actually losing anybody that we felt was going to be useful for our end game.
Do you feel like that, looking back now, is that the right way to go?
Yeah, so it's so hard to watch because Josh like really did trust us, and it's especially hard where I think there's a moment where I tell him, you know, we're voting Kane, and he gives a confessional where he's like, well, you know, Frannie told me we're going Kane, so we're going Kane. And watching that, I'm like, oh gosh, you know, we really did kind of have him in our pocket. But I think at the time, I'm not upset with the decision that I made because Josh felt very erratic to me. Like it really felt like he was throwing lies around. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, I would say something to him and then an hour later it would be in somebody else's ear. And so I was incentivized to just like get that chaos out of there because I just didn't know how to deal with him. He's a lovely person. So from that perspective, I'm sure we would have been able to work something out. And I love Josh, but at the time, I think it made sense for me.
Can you talk about what life was like around the camp when everybody first came together from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, it's just like Carolyn says in the episode, so chaotic. And like, I feel like personally, I don't do well in larger groups of people. Like, I kind of like one on one or smaller groups. So having everybody just sit around and talk to each other was very confusing. And then also, I kind of had this weird, like kid on the playground sensation where I felt like my best friend was going and playing with other kids. I would see Matt go and like talk to members of RHAP, and I would get this anxiety like, oh my gosh, are we going to stay together? Like, is Soka going to stay together? Or is everybody just scattering? And so, yeah, it became very confusing very quickly. And then the element of having Josh's vote and then Matt's vote being split, where half of us are safe, just like really threw things out of whack completely, because it really limited our ability to work in the way that we wanted to based on like personalities, bonds, and stuff like that.
All right, well, let's get into that vote because, of course, I'm sure that
Yeah.
that was a point in the season that you probably had the most people talking about, where you were at and how
Mhm.
you ultimately handled the situation in the immunity challenge, where you
Mhm.
have this opportunity where you're able to win individual immunity and PB and J for your group
Yeah, don't
when
forget
you
the
and Matt.
PBJ.
Yeah, it almost killed Carson, but, ultimately we don't
Yeah.
know if it we don't know if that's why
That
Carson
was
got sick.
my
He had a lot going
secondary.
on.
Yeah, the real
Yeah.
plan was to take out Carson, and so that nearly worked. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so, you 2 are split up, and,
Mhm.
I guess I would just love to hear, now that we have some time to talk about it, how you were feeling, at that challenge.
Yeah. So the challenge was, I mean, the challenge was so incredible. Again, I really as soon as we started the challenge, I have this thought pass through my head where I'm like, "Oh my god, I can barely hold this freaking pole above my head. Like I'm going to be the first one to drop out of this thing." And so then as people kept dropping and dropping, I was like, "Holy crap, how am I still standing here?" Like it just didn't make sense to me. And once it got down to the point of it being, me as the only like orange team person left, and then like two or three other people on the purple team, by that point I've stood there for so long. I've had plenty of time to think about like lots and lots of options. And I was definitely aware that Matt's group was like not ideal for him. I think all of the people who were most interested in working with Matt and I were in my group. Like we'd had conversations already with Carson and Kane. I had already started to bond with Carolyn. And then, of course, Danny and Heidi are in my group as well.
Mhm.
So, not a great spread for Matt. But I think it was one of those moments for me where do I care about Matt immensely as a person? Yes. Was he an excellent alliance member? Maybe. I mean, he hadn't voted yet, so like,
Hard to
so
say. Right,
hard
we
to
don't
say.
know.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little ambiguous. But like, I think that he and I would have done a lot together in the game strategically. But I think there is a point where I was sort of like, I'm here for me. Again, like I said, I really have this wall up of not wanting to make this experience about like a relationship with a guy. I was like, I'm here to play, I'm here for myself. And I felt like I was going to be able to, maneuver forward in my group. And I wanted to like go for the win against Brandon. And it felt good. And boy, was it devastating when Matt went home. But like, I'm still proud that it happened the way it did, because that was just a huge moment for me, like
Yeah.
personally.
And I know that you caught a lot of flack from people. How
Yeah.
could she do this? I never I questioned, your decision making there because I just feel like if you're in that spot and
Mhm.
you have a chance to, you've been waiting all this time to get out there and you have an opportunity
Mhm.
to win this challenge. And just like I know it seems like a really long time for us, but it's day 14.
Mhm,
It's 2
mhm. Yeah.
weeks. 2
It's
weeks
2
that
weeks.
you've known each other.
Well, yeah, and then also, I mean, people giving me flack, it's like I also gave, food and immunity to what, like 5 other people? Like that's nothing to sneeze at either. Like that was an
Mhm.
opportunity for me to be building bonds with like Carolyn and Carson and Kane. So yeah, thanks for not questioning me. You're one of the few people who hasn't. So I
No, I
appreciate
really didn't. I just felt like, it's hard to be like a human in that spot and not think about like, well, all right, got it. YOLO. I'm gonna win this
that. Yeah.
immunity right now.
Yeah, well, and also, and I'll just tell you, like, I think, Matt and I, we're the most like significant showmance that has come in a while, but I feel like not to like, knock on like figtails or anything, but I feel like there are a lot of situations in recent seasons that I'd remembered where there had been like either a romantic or a strategic alliance between like a guy and a girl, and often the woman goes home first, Figgy. I feel like who was it? Like Molly or like Chelsea or somebody was like lightly implicated in a showmance. And I was like, I refuse. I refuse to be another victim to this. I refuse to go home first. So it was purely just like if it's meant to be, Matt and I will connect again after this game, but I got to push through for myself.
Yeah. And you did. And you did.
Yeah, I did,
Now, did you know he didn't have his bag?
Oh my God. That whole thing was so funny. So before we left for the challenge, Matt and Brandon also didn't have his bag. So anybody who says Matt's a buffoon, like, okay, he's not the only one. They looked at their bags and they were like, you know what? I'm not bringing my bag today. Like, I don't care. I'm not bringing it. And all of us were like, okay, like more power to you. And then when they go to another beach, we were like, those clowns. I looked in the shelter, I saw his bag, and I was like, I'm not bringing that for him, because I knew that his idol was fake. I was just absolutely convinced it was fake. I was like, I don't want you to play that. How embarrassing. And then the only other thing of use in there for him was his shot in the dark. But I believed that given the like mechanics of who was there and who was voting, I thought his vote would actually matter. So like, I don't even want to give you the opportunity to use the shot in the dark because I think it's a bad idea. I think you should use your vote. So yeah, I stared at it and I was like, huh, idiot. And then I didn't bring it with me. It like didn't occur to me.
Yeah. All right. Well, talk through then your afternoon then. Okay, Matt is going to be part of this tribal council, but Heidi is going to have your ally is going to find a control the vote advantage. And so I would love to get from your perspective what you thought was going to happen with that. What would have been the best move?
Yeah. So that whole thing was very, very confusing. Also, just something I want to say, like Heidi. I think in my immediate exit interview, I was kind of like, I didn't work well strategically with Heidi. There was a golden era of Frannie and Heidi working together, and unfortunately, it was when we did not go to tribal. Like when Jamie showed up at Soka, Heidi and I were doing a lot together to try to make her feel comfortable and talk about having some sort of like 3-person alliance with her. And I really felt like we were on the same page at that point, like making a lot of things happen. But once we get to that advantage, first of all, I mean, you see it in my face when Heidi finds it and I'm right behind her. I'm pissed. I was like, I want this thing. I was this close and I didn't get it. And the way that Heidi like dealt with how to play that advantage was really confusing to me. She went and talked with everyone like one at a time. And she started by talking with Kane, which all the rest of us there were kind of like, why are you talking to Kane about this? Like, what an odd thing. Danny and I were a little put off by that. We were like, dude, we're your number one allies here. Why are you going and talking with like a member of RHAP who ostensibly we're trying to like work against right now? So she goes and talks to Kane for a long time. She comes to me, which is what you see on the beach. And my first thought is, yeah, put it on Jam Jam. Like that makes sense. All of that conversation that you see, I feel like was the first 5 to 10 minutes of us talking about this advantage. Okay. And I'm like, yeah, put on Jam Jam. Sure. Then we go and we discuss more as a group. And by the time we go to tribal, at least, and I don't want to like, we all have only our memory of what happened. I don't want to like say anything about what other people remember because we're just talking from our own experience. My memory is that by the time we actually got ready to go for tribal, put the vote on Jam Jam is not what we were saying anymore. And
yes.
Yeah, because that
what were you saying?
We were saying, so what would have been best in that situation, right, is to take a RHAP's vote and put it on another member of RHAP. I think what we were saying was to take like Brandon's vote because he's somebody who obviously cannot receive votes. So there's no situation where like, I think we were just unclear of the mechanics. Like, for example, if there's a tie, okay, you revote, the 2 people who received votes can't revote. Like if Heidi had stolen Lauren's vote and she was one of the members of the tie, can she use that steal a vote again? Or control a vote again? That was kind of unclear to us. So it makes most sense to take Brandon's vote because he's not going to be voted against and then put it on a member of RHAP because the ultimate goal, I think, is to try to get a member of RHAP out. Like we've said at this point, we kind of have like Soka versus RHAP happening a little bit. It felt like RHAP was like a big monolith and they really like were really it was clear to me that they were interested in staying together.
Not too strong. Yeah.
They were very RHAP too strong. Yeah. So we kind of had a vested interest in getting one of them out. So that's what made most sense to us. And you sort of see this like in my interviews that are happening during that episode. Like, I'm not saying in my interviews Heidi should put the vote on Jam Jam, because that's not what we were talking about by the time we went to Tribal. But, you know, in Heidi's defense, I think there was a lot going on that day, a lot of conversations. The mechanic of it was really confusing to us because there are so many extra layers that I think it totally could have just gotten confused. But I remember feeling frustrated that that's how it was used. And they don't show this in the show, but when Heidi stands up and says that she has her advantage, you know, she explains how she's going to play it. From my memory, the RHAP members actually laughed. Like, Brandon laughed when she said, I'm going to take Lauren's vote and put it on Jam Jam, because it was immediately clear to everyone there that that wasn't going to change the outcome of anything. So I found that whole back and forth really confusing. Like, I really felt like we had come up with better options. And that's just not how it played out. And, you know, ultimately, like, I was able to move forward from it. But after that, I felt like I had a harder time working with Heidi a bit.
Yeah. Was there discussion after that vote with you and Danny and Heidi about like, hey, what happened?
No, honestly, not really. I mean, things kind of like broke open after that, and stuff started moving so quickly. Like, after Matt left, literally the next day is when Brandon went home. So the discussion there was, you know, are we going to use the idol on me? Like, am I getting votes? That kind of thing. We never really circled back around to talk about how that advantage was used, because ultimately, like, what's done is done. But that just kind of disrupted things for me, where I was less interested in working with Danny and Heidi moving forward. Cause I just felt, I was like, it's like, I don't feel like we're on the same page. Like, I kind of want to just like try something new.
I don't feel like that the episodes really gave a lot of time to you and how you were feeling after Matt went home. Was that something that really had an effect on you?
Oh yeah, hugely. It had like a shockingly huge effect on me. And I think I wasn't expecting that. The whole Tribal, it kind of becomes clear that like Matt is spiraling. He's very concerned. He really thinks he's going to go home. I was pretty stone-faced through all of that. But then as soon as he actually walked out, I started crying and could not stop for like hours, which is so embarrassing. I was like, I need to make this stop, but you're so tired. You're so like, you know, I was so tied to this person that I was just distraught. And you see like, you know, Jam Jam and Carolyn hugging me. And honestly, for me, that was like a pretty significant moment of like social bonding with them. Jam Jam, you know, if Matt hadn't gone home, it would have been Jam Jam, but he took the time that night to like sit with me and give me a hug and comfort me, which just really points to like how strong his social game is. But it was really, really upsetting. And then, you know, and then Carson has his whole like vomiting thing. The next day, Carson and I are like out of commission. So it was very hard to come back from that.
So let's talk about this vote where Brandon goes home. Ultimately, that you
Yeah.
get the idol played on you. I mean, that
Mhm.
must have been a very exciting moment for you, where it looks like that. Okay, it's very clear that that Ratu is going to be targeting you, but
Mhm.
Danny feels like that he is going to save you in this
Mhm.
spot. So I would love to hear about what your day was like here.
Yeah, that day was really confusing because, like I said, at this point after Matt leaves, I'm feeling a little rocky with Danny and Heidi. Like, we had just kind of not checked in as much as we should have after the merge started, and so I kind of felt a little unstable with them. So honestly, the whole day I was talking with members of Ratu to try to get it off of me and onto Danny. I at that point felt very confident that Danny had the idol. And my argument, which maybe this is so back, I'm going to reveal how like strategically I was like, beep, bop, boop. You know what I mean? I had no rice. I didn't know what was going on. But my argument to somebody like Brandon was like, if your goal tonight is to flush an idol, which it was, they like were pretty clear about that to me. Why would you put the vote on me? Like, I don't have the idol. I swear to God. I was like, you can look through all of my stuff. So nobody's playing anything for me, which is funny because, of course, that's what happens. But I was like, if you're interested in flushing something, like, you should put the votes on Danny or Heidi, because either Danny's going to play it for himself or he'll play it for Heidi because, you know, they're tight like this. I just sort of, it was like weird to me that they were targeting me. It didn't make sense. Also, my closest alliance member has just gone home. I was like, who do you think I have right now? Like, in what way am I a threat?
But Franny, they told you they wanted to flush an idol?
They thought, yeah, they thought that the Soka idol was still in circulation, and they were interested in
But
flushing it.
famously, it's been talked about how they didn't split the votes.
I know, and that was shocking. I don't understand why they didn't do it. I talked to like all of them about it at Ponderosa, and the
You
story I
can't
heard,
flush the idol unless you split the
yeah,
votes, right?
yeah. Then all of a sudden you're just idled out. I know, but they basically, I mean, all day the discussion was like, where is the
Yeah.
Soka idol? And they were
And
interested
I
in
guess you
trying to
could just
figure out
get
what it was.
lucky that the idol gets played on the wrong person. You could flush it
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just wanted it to be played because they wanted to know where it was. I think that a lot of them had the intention to split the votes, but for whatever reason, the communication was not there and it just didn't happen. Yeah, honestly, I think that whole cycle was just a comedy of like a lot of errors that ended up working out in a way that was like interesting and good for me.
Yeah. Because they are also telling Danny and Heidi that the votes is going to be for you. And then
Yeah.
it was.
And that's what I don't understand. I genuinely, and that's what it was all very confusing to me. And another thing that I think like maybe helps to understand this, I think that Ratu had like a pretty serious belief that I had the idol. When we came home from that tribal where Matt goes home, they actually, and this is, you know, I love all of them a lot. This isn't anything to say about them, but I felt like they approached me in a way that was like pretty intense. They came up to me and they were like, "What's in Matt's bag?" Like all day, Matt wanted his bag. Surely there's an idol in there, and surely you must have it now. Like either you took it or like Matt gave it to you before he left. So I think that they really kind of had this idea in their head that Matt had the idol and that somehow that could have been passed to me. I don't know. It all got very confusing, and I feel like their logic about like who did or didn't have the idol wasn't super sound, so it became hard for me to follow and like counter against because I just didn't understand it.
All right. I want to talk about the next vote, where ultimately it's going to be where Kane goes home, that they just played the idol on you. Okay. And so you're going to end up, you win immunity here in this spot
Mhm.
again. Okay. But there's the moment in this episode where, you know, you're the one that you go to Danny and you're like, hey, should we, there's 3 of these Tikkas, they're playing the middle. We should knock them out. And Danny responds very negatively to this, like
Yeah.
that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That's
Yeah.
that's a terrible idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Did that have like some long-term ramifications for you that he thought that was such a bad idea?
Yeah, I mean, that was really frustrating. And honestly, if anything, as I've said, I'm feeling a little rocky with Danny and Heidi. For me, that just really solidified like, okay, maybe I can't work with this person. Like I'm bringing to him what I feel like is a very like, you know, logical option that's informed by what we're seeing and what's happening. And he just like very quickly shut it down. And I was like, I want to work with people who will, you know, like work with me a little bit more than just work at me, you know, strategically. But at that point, so you see me having the conversation with Danny and Heidi about getting out of Tikka. I also had that conversation with all the remaining members of Ratu. We all kind of went down to the well together. I made my case. I was like, hey, I'm no longer interested in this Ratu Soka war. It's boring. It sucks. I was like, I want to work with you guys. I think we can work together. And I think that Tikka is playing the middle a lot more than we realize. And they were all on board with that. From my perspective, they seemed to think it was a good idea, especially Kane. Like Kane and I were really working closely on this. And the question then was like, okay, so can you bring in Danny and Heidi to do this with us? And I was like, yeah, surely they'll be in on it. Like they'll see reason. Amazing. We all, you know, I went to them and I was like, how, you know, can we do this? Like, what do you guys think? And they were not into it. And I was like, well, can you at least like pretend to be into it in a conversation so that we can get Ratu like doing that? We all got together like Soka and Ratu. And I felt like they could, and I know that Danny and Heidi can both lie effectively. So I don't know like what was going on with them, but they couldn't even hold it together enough to convince Ratu for like a moment that they were going to go with this plan. So I think everything about that just falls apart, which is why I end up voting for Jamie, because I was like, well, crap, nobody's working with me. Ratu now doesn't trust Danny and Heidi. Danny and Heidi are not going to go with this plan against Tikka. So what I felt my only option is to go with what Danny and Heidi were saying and the members of Tikka. And they told me that they were splitting votes on Lauren and Jamie, which is why I ended up voting for Jamie. And then I think the rationale for not telling me about Kane is they felt that I was getting really close to Kane. Again, didn't make sense to me. I was like, I met this guy 2-3 days ago. Like we've had a couple of strategic conversations, but I think that's why, I mean, I just got completely left out there. I remember like people were saying in podcasts, like maybe she like put a vote on Jamie to like scare her, like try to do the, no, I just like actually didn't know that votes were going on Kane that night.
Did you ever attempt to try to partner up with the Tikka Three? I mean, I feel like that we see where you're having conversations where with Carson about how maybe we should vote out Danny before Matt goes home, and obviously you have a good relationship with Carolyn. Did they ever like try to like offer you a spot with them?
Yeah, totally. So at the beginning of the merge, I felt like my closest in with the Tika 3 was with Carson. I felt like really comfortable with Carson. He and I just hit it off really quickly. And I felt like we were on the same page. But then actually, and this is one of those things where I was like, I really should have worked through this differently. When Carson got sick, I was like really hesitant to overwhelm him by talking a lot of strategy. And I think if I had like known him better, I would have known that he wanted to just push through and strategize anyways. But I was like reluctant to
Strategy
go
is
up and
healing for Carson.
strategy. I know it was his medicine. It's what he needed.
Mhm.
But so I didn't want to like overwhelm him or press him. So I remember those like 2 days after he was sick, I didn't talk to him a lot because I was just really trying to give him space and like recognize the human need of like, I feel like crap right now. So during that time, I felt like I became a little disconnected from Carson. We kind of got off of that page. And then after Kane goes home is when we see I start to get really close to Carolyn. And she and I had been like talking, hanging out. I adore Carolyn. And so we just like really, really hit it off. But after Kane goes home, I was like, okay, every single person here lied to me last night. I need some new friends. And it was at that point that I really, really was trying to hop on board as like the Tikka fourth. I remember I like actually went to Carson and Jam Jam and Carolyn and was like, can I please be your fourth? Like, I'll do whatever. I think you guys are great. You know what I mean? But I think it was actually that and the closeness of my relationship with Carolyn that ultimately led them to want to vote against me, Jam Jam and Carson. Like they
You're
thought
stealing our friend. Yeah.
stealing our friend, which is very valid. I mean, she and I spent a lot of time together. I think that Carson said this in his interview, and I don't know, but I do feel like there's a chance that she would have played the idol on me if she had found out that I was getting votes, which by the way, how crazy would that have been if I had to
People keep playing the idols on you. Frannie is not leaving.
Yeah, she's staying. So I think it really made sense for them to take me out because I was getting so close to Carolyn. But man, I was bummed that we couldn't work that out as a group before.
Wait, now we talked about your exit when you initially happened during the season. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about that because I would love to talk about the final tribal council. So is there anything else that you wanted to add about when you go out of the game?
Oh gosh, let me think for a second. Okay, this is like a super quick thing that is apropos of nothing, but it was like a big deal for me in the game. So at the very, very first challenge, the marooning challenge where Bruce hurts himself, I actually got like a pretty bad cut on my finger that required stitches, which was the first time I had ever gotten stitches. It was like terrifying. I was in this like dirty environment and I like nearly passed out. Which you don't see because none of it happened on camera. Like, you know, they bring Bruce back to consciousness and I'm not going to be like, I also have a cut on my finger. Like, so that all happens later. But I kind of had this whole thing going with the doctor where he told me like, I'm putting in these stitches. These need to stay in for, 2 weeks and then I'll take them out. And I was like, I will be in this game when you take out these stitches. I swear to God. I was like, you're doing this in Fiji. You and I are going to be here and it's going to happen. And literally, he took out the stitches at that reward challenge. And so then I got voted out the day later. And I was like, okay, I just stayed as long as I could. Yeah. It was just for the stitches. Yeah. So that's the cosmic reason that I stayed as long as I could.
Yeah. More cosmic interference. Yeah. But let's talk about the final tribal council. And I would love to get your sense of, these three competitors and you spend time with all of them in the game and had a great viewpoint on what they were doing. So how did you see the final tribal council?
Yeah. So, well, one thing I'll say that is so different as a player in this game versus the viewers for this particular season, I think as you're watching the season, we're seeing so much of the Tikka 3, their perspectives and their gameplay. So it very much feels like they are on top the entire time. But from the perspective of a player out there, like you see on the show, I'm identifying like, hey, I think the Tikkas are up to something. But I think the general vibe was that like these Tikkas are like under the radar. They're kind of floating. Like people weren't always seeing them as a huge threat. So I remember getting close to the end and people were like, oh my God, like it could be the three of them in this. Like, how did we get here? This is crazy. Heidi's fire making was obviously so impressive, like such a badass moment. So going into the final tribal, like as a juror, I remember feeling confused. Like it didn't really feel to me like there was a massive standout. But I like really, really wanted to vote for Carolyn. I feel which okay, and I'll get to why I didn't. But I feel like at Ponderosa, there was kind of a lot of discussion about Carolyn's game and how she was playing. Like I feel like I understand Carolyn. I get how she is, and I saw that she was playing a more strategic game than some other people realized. But there was a lot of talk at Ponderosa about like, what's Carolyn doing? You know, she goes around and she'll scream and, you know, stuff like that. And I was really maintaining like, no, she understands this game a lot more than you think she does. Like, you know, she's going to be able to explain it at Final Tribal. And when we got there, and you know, Final Tribal Council is so hard. You know, they're exhausted. They're getting a million questions. It lasts so much longer than you see on TV. But I was not like entirely convinced by the things that she said. And I remember that she spent a lot of time focusing on certain game moves that happened before the merge. Like she's talking a lot about the vote where Sarah Wade went home, and watching it on TV. Obviously, that's an excellent move. She like really had a sense of what was going on. But for those of us who never even met Sarah Wade, we were all kind of like, okay, you know, I remember sort of feeling like that wasn't a very like momentous move from my perspective. So I think that we were kind of trying to like coax out of her more like, what have you done recently? You know, like post merge, what's been happening? And she was doing a lot, but it just didn't feel like she was fully articulating it. And Jam Jam just really came out there and had like a really crisp explanation of his game. I particularly loved his answer to the like emotions question where he's talking about how he, you know, identifies like what we look like when we're talking about something that we're excited about, and then like uses that to know when we're lying.
Sparkle
like,
in your eye, right?
The sparkle, and I was like, oh my God, he's talking about me. I talked to him without the sparkle, and he knew. So I was just so impressed by him that by the end, I felt very confident that he, you know, like really deserved this win and felt like the right person. For me, Heidi, it was the sort of thing where it's like, maybe I like worked too closely with her to vote for her. Like if I had had a little more separation from it, maybe I would have sort of seen her move in a more objective, or her game in a more objective way. But I sort of felt like other folks had driven some of the moves that she was claiming, and I felt like her name had been popping up a lot as kind of like backup plans, as opposed to because folks thought she was like a really big threat. So I don't know. I had a hard time with some of the things that she was explaining at Final Tribal, which is why I didn't really feel a desire to vote for her.
What if Carson had beaten Heidi? And of course, Heidi breaks the record. So, good luck, Carson. But what if he did? Okay.
Right.
And he ends up, it's all Tikka 3 final. Is Carson getting votes at the Final Tribal Council?
Most definitely. I think that's a crazy scenario because building up to the Final Four at Ponderosa, a lot of us were like, I think Carson's running this thing. But we weren't exactly sure, right? Like, we don't know for sure. When Carson leaves by fire, comes to Ponderosa, he literally like gave us a Final Tribal Council speech. He laid out his entire game as he's like shoveling pizza into his mouth. And he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I also work for NASA, you know, like all these things. And all of us were like, holy crap. This kid just ran this entire show. And the narrative was very much like Carson would have won if he had got to the end. But watching Jam Jam's Final Tribal performance and like how crisp it was, I actually don't know, because I think that Jam Jam was better socially. Like I think Jam Jam's so warm, like he's so great at building relationships with people, and he was really good at explaining it, that it's very hard for me to say like which of those perspectives would have won out in the end. But I think it would have been like an intense battle for sure with the two of them.
Okay. Anything else from Survivor 44 that you want to make sure we know?
Oh God, I don't know. Okay, this went by so fast. Let me see if there's anything else I have here. Oh
Well, I'll give you a
gosh.
second to think about that because I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
know that are you interested in returning to Fiji?
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course I am. Yeah,
Yes.
I would love that. Yeah, I think about it all the time. And also, and I was kind of thinking about this, a little bit ago. Like I said, coming into the game, very low expectations for myself. And I think part of that is a coping mechanism, right? Like if you set the bar really low, then as long as you make it a little bit, you'll be proud of yourself. And I am very proud of myself. But I never for a second going into the game or playing the game believed that I could win. Never for a second. If I had gotten to the final tribal council, I do not know what I would have said or done. You know what I mean? And I'm sure I would have figured it out, but I just did not like see myself in that position ever. But after like playing, getting voted out, hearing from other people how they saw my game, like why they saw me as a threat, and kind of just doing all of that like processing, now I'm at a point where I'm like, wait, maybe I could. So it sort of just makes me want to go back and try it all over again. Now that I sort of have that different level of faith in myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I'd love to know from you as somebody who studies mindfulness that do you feel like in order for us and not just on Survivor, but for everybody who's listening to the podcast, if they're going to do something, do you have to have that mindset of that I'm going to do the thing? Or is it okay to have that doubt and think that maybe you're not going to do it and just try it and see how it goes?
Yeah, so this is like such a hard question. And I'm actually, so this fall, I'm applying for PhD programs. I'm really interested in going into a program that looks at like the social psychology of mindsets. So this is this kind of stuff I want to figure out. But I think that it's really different for different people. I think for a lot of people, this is what Jam Jam did. Visualizing winning is like crackerjack, like that'll get you the win. But for me, I think that, being unsure of myself pushed me more to prove to myself that I could do something to be proud of. And so I think if I had gone in like, I'm the best, I'm going to win, I might not have pushed myself in the same way that I did. So I don't know. I think you can have either mindset. And ultimately, I think Jeff says this sometimes, but like, I feel like Survivor will give you what you need. And I feel like I really got that from this experience.
Yeah. Well, I came into this interview with a very positive mindset that I knew it was going to be great because I knew how much fun we were going to have. But unfortunately, we're just about out of time. Frannie, where can people keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah. So my handle on all things is Hail the Veil. HAIL the Veil, VAIL. I've gotten questions
Yes,
about that. Veil's my middle name. That's why it's like that.
got it.
Yeah, so that's where people can follow me. I'm on Cameo, and it's like Cameo's like makes me stressed out, but it's really really fun, and I've gotten a lot of joy from like hearing people's stories and getting to talk to them. So check me out on there. Yeah, all those places.
Okay. And any other exciting plans coming up?
Oh, I don't know, just the rest of my life. Matt and I we're starting to watch The Amazing Race. We kind of
Oh,
we
is
might want to
this?
get in on that. We're kind of
We would
curious
love
about
to
it.
see it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like, who do we call to go do that? We kind of want to try it.
Yeah.
So that could
I
be in the
mean
works as well.
I mean,
Who's
if
to
they're
say?
looking for like a new Derek X and Claire, I think that you really would do great in that spot.
Well, I know, but we're watching their season and we're like, well, dang it, they took our whole thing. They did it and then they won. Like, what
They
are we
kind of
supposed to do?
they
Yeah.
did that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could argue maybe you took their thing.
Yeah, well, true. Oh, true. So now we got to reclaim it. But the bar is very high. We'd have to win.
It's a very high bar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Well, Franny, thank you so much for making time to do this. If you missed any of our other interviews that we've done so far with Jam Jam and Carolyn and Carson, you can find them all in our podcast feed. Go to robhasawebsite.com/subscribe for everything we're doing here on Rob Has a Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.